Before we dive into this video, I'd like to remind you that the preview dives a bit into the story of Rift Apart. Although all the information in this video has been shared publicly by Insomniac Games, you might be wary and prefer to experience Rift Apart completely blank, so watch this video at your own discretion. Thank you for listening. On May 12th, a preview of the game was showcased. Sony invited some folks to an exclusive gameplay showing of Rift Apart. No, they did not play it. They were simply invited to watch over 30 minutes of unedited gameplay. From what I've seen, the videos and all, the commentaries and all, the videos range from 7 minutes to 12 minutes. They even called this a hands-off demo. The presentation had key staff from Insomniac Games. Those invited listened to pretty much over 2 hours of game coverage. Not saying they watched 2 hours of raw gameplay. It's simply the case of developer sessions plus 30 minutes of raw gameplay. The event was of course embargoed. It got lifted on May 12th, and yeah, as you can see, there's quite a lot of information to go over. I'm not even kidding. There's so many articles and different commentary videos left and right. So I thought this video would be a very nice compilation of everything we learned on May 12th. So I hope you enjoy this one, folks. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is newcomer friendly. IGN notes that Insomniac Games emphasized again and again that Rift Apart is standalone and meant to be timeless in its enjoyment. Jonathan Dornbush explains the scenes he watched, how they were more emotionally nuanced. Game transitions, for example, from brief scenes to gameplay with no load times. Mike Daly, director, explained that in Rift Apart, everything you see is in real time, meaning there's no pre-rendered scenes. Even our cinematics use the engine that is both for consistency, so that's one way in which the game is able to look cinematic and consistent, but also, as you've observed, we want to get emotions across during our gameplay segment, and there's a lot of cinematic tricks with how you use the camera and how you balance the sound, or when you deliver lines of dialogue that really enhance that. Rivet and Clank need help with their ship at some point in the gameplay. They're looking for someone named the Fixer, the giant mech we saw in the State of Play gameplay. They turned it on eventually, and apparently it has a midlife crisis, believing that nothing can be fixed anymore, that he's broken, acting all negative, mentally struggling, all that, which would explain why it would try to attack us. There's destruction happening, havoc. Rivet and Clank need to come up with a solution. It appears Clank will be the one to calm him down. The footage cuts afterwards, but that's what was pretty much explained. At least, I mean, if we take a look at Clank here, he gets curious and starts staring at the Fixer. When the Fixer mentioned that it doesn't have wisdom, Dornbush explains that the robot's change of heart is what relieves him. As for his change of heart, I believe we'll have Clank to thank for. The Fixer apparently calls Clank broken at some point in the gameplay. If Clank is broken, you know, his broken arm, then Rivet too, she's broken. And then she tells Clank that we're both pretty awesome. A clip shared by GameSpot actually has a snippet of what I'm talking about. Let me play it.
I see a fellow broken one. You must accept your brokenness.
Is he talking about me?
Because of your arm? Don't listen to him, Bolts. If you're broken, so am I. And I think we're pretty awesome.
So yeah, after listening to this clip, naturally, that entices Clank to try and calm down the Fixer after what he learned from Rivet. Insomniac Games explains how Rivet is a parallel to Ratchet. In other words, alternate Ratchet confirmed. Marcus Smith actually did confirm this over on the Japanese PlayStation blog. Marcus Smith, by the way, is creative director of Rift Apart. It's his first time working on a Ratchet & Clank title, if you didn't know. Now this is where people start wondering why Rivet has too similar of a moveset as Ratchet. Some people might call this scenario a reskin of Ratchet. Mike Daly, game director, explained, for that reason, Ratchet and Rivet play very similarly. They're dimensional counterparts, So they're more or less two sides of the same coin. Every time you learn a mechanic or acquire a gadget for one, that applies to the other just as well. You don't have to mentally juggle which character can do which move or which character has which weapon. So in summary, I feel Insomniac Games went this route as to not overwhelm the player, like, hey, I was used to Ratchet's movesets, why is she playing so differently? You know, that type of scenario. So, a bit about her background, Rivet. She never had her own Clank. When she felt down during her life, when she had sad moments in her life, she had no friend to be by her side. She always fought solo as a rebel. Until, of course, she meets Clank. Rivet might appear tough from the outside, but from what we've seen as explained by IGN, Rivet can have vulnerability. So far, she looks to be a very supportive character. That bond she has with Clank, I mean, she calls him Bolts. I recall hearing Bolts in the State of Play gameplay, but here we clearly hear it better.
Your arm? Don't listen to him, Bolts.
Clank brings up the Dimensionator, explains IGN. All we knew was this scene where Clank was worried about not finding the Dimensionator to fix the dimensions. Once she hears about this Dimensionator from Clank, she wonders why Ratchet didn't want to use it. She apparently sounds desperate or eager to find other Lombaxes, or be there. What this confirms, the Resistance group only has Rivet as a Lombax. Methinks, once she realizes Clank's friend is a Lombax, she gets curious, naturally. By the way, what I mentioned right now, I haven't seen this sort of dialogue in any raw gameplay out there. This was simply mentioned by IGN's article. Dornbush believes the humor and heart of the series is present in Rift Apart, and how it has more heart. The arsenal, health, upgrades, unlocks, bolts, whatnot, is shared between Ratchet and Rivet, as stated by Mike Daly previously. And we already had an idea of this looking back at the State of Play trailer, how Rivet shares her bank account with Ratchet. Armors are composed of 3 pieces in this game. Confirmation, we have to find pieces. We can mix and match and even alter the colors. This is according to the Push Square article. The confirmation of finding pieces of armor was something I speculated in my in-depth video. It was also reported that completing pocket dimensions, anomalies created by the Dimensionator, it will also reward you with armor pieces. This was also according to Push Square's article. Armor pieces are rewards after completing some quests and even arena challenges. Another example of a challenge would be writing a bug on a mount. This is according to what Easy Allies said in their video.
These, we've seen the mount where they were like writing the bug. If you make it to the end, you get a little armor piece. Tons of armor customization.
I think they mean Speetle, perhaps in a pocket dimension? Another example of a challenge would be glitch. By the way, when we're hacking a computer with Ratchet, that's how we enter the segments of glitch. This was brought up by Mike Daly. Fun fact about glitch. This robot originates from what Insomniac Games calls internal Insomniac Game Jam, as a powerful writable robot. That was the original vision at the company with this type of robot. So they thought to themselves, why not take our original concept and turn it into a character instead, with personality and a bit of story. This information comes from Grizz Gaming. So the thing with glitch, I believe it's the new sort of unlock a door, complete the puzzle type of thing. There's also one example Polygon mentioned, about pocket dimensions. One will look like a roller coaster type of gameplay. When completing that pocket dimension, Rivet wins a cosmetic helmet piece of armor. There will be cosmetic armor in this game. This was confirmed on a blog post by Marcus Smith from April 26th. From the State of Play footage, I feel collecting all 3 pieces gives us a bonus stat boost. Whether or not every single piece of armor we find will be a requirement to unlock bonuses is unknown. But from the looks of it here, collecting 3 out of 3 gives us a bonus, which I feel can be used later on, regardless of what armor you decide to wear, hence the cosmetic aspect of the armor. Actually, Easy Allies thought they heard Insomniac say that if you don't like wearing a certain piece of armor, you can simply use its stat.
tons of armor customization.
Ooh,
okay. You can even get the stat without wearing it, I think they said. You know, if you don't like the look of it, mixing and matching sets.
In other words, once you unlock the stat boost by finding all pieces of armor, it doesn't matter which armor you use afterwards. Insomniac also talks a lot about haptic feedback and 3D audio. What these two terms basically mean: haptic makes you feel the game in your controller. Subtle movements in the game to even bolts being collected, you will feel that in your controller. 3D audio is a way of having sounds in games sound more natural, more in-depth, and immersive. Back then, developers would try to mimic that sound by playing around with the volume. Now, game director Mike Daly added the following: "We realized that we could dial things up, and we could also dial things back dynamically, which means when big things happen like weapons or explosions, it's like listening to the sound of the game, where things naturally go down to let you hear the dialogue come through. We have the same system applied to haptics, so that you're always feeling the most important things, but it never gets muddy or confusing." He also added that riffs have distinct sound. You can feel those riffs coming towards you. It surrounds you with the 3D audio technology. Haptics have this pulse effect in your hands when it comes to riffs. When looking at models, they thought of keeping the iconic forms, but focus on new material, for example, Clank's reflection. Ratchet was given more facial expressions, so they had to fully reshape his facial structure, explained art director Grant Hollis. Looking at Rivet, they played around with different fur color. The one in the center looks really familiar. Her eye color was even different in this concept. So looking at this scene a bit, apparently Quark introduces our duo in Megalopolis. It's not shown in gameplay, but it's simply mentioned. This parade thrown for the duo apparently also chronicles their adventures. Games Radar added, "The entire sequence is one gorgeous playable homage to Ratchet & Clank history, catching newcomers up on the series' basic premise and gameplay mechanics, all while hammering home the idea that these two are inseparable from one another, partners in crime and best friends for life." I was wondering if Rift Apart would have like a journal sort of flashback thing. Perhaps this is it, you know, the tutorial phase of the game. Quark has been confirmed. I mean, looking at this weapons and traversal trailer shared not too long ago, I mean, there he is. According to Game Informer, in the beginning, Quark narrates an adventure of Ratchet & Clank, which we get to play like in a movie set sort of thing. Mike Daly added, "So in the story of our game, Ratchet and Clank start out in their dimension, where Captain Quark is a larger-than-life character and basically impossible to avoid. He sort of leads you through the intro and is present there. But when the dimensional cataclysm occurs, Ratchet and Clank gets sucked through while Captain Quark gets left behind." He then continues by saying that Quark won't be majorly present, but he'll be there, saying that's not the last time we'll see him. So with Quark not having that major role, the team wants to instead expand on the new characters we'll see. So what happens in Megalopolis pretty much, Ratchet demonstrates his moves to the crowd, until he realizes that something is wrong. The goons show up eventually. For some reason, Game Informer said Blarg? I feel like they did mistaken that for the goons. After all, when Nefarious shows up to steal the Dimensionator, he says goons were supposed to get rid of us 8 minutes ago. However, from what we can see here, we don't hear Quark narrate, so I believe the narration takes place before. Another thing about this weapons and traversal trailer, Skid McMarx is no longer a robot. And he's green! He was yellow in the reimagining, so I guess they reverted back to his green color. So looking at how he reverted back to an organic life form, it's possible there's some sort of technology in Ratchet & Clank which we're still unaware of. It could also explain Big Al's arm being back to normal. He did lose his arm in Deadlocked. There's also Rusty Pete, quickly looking at this trailer. Out of all people in Ratchet & Clank's life, there he is, Rusty Pete. Speaking of Rusty Pete, there's an alternate version of him called Pierre Lefebvre. Rivet and Pierre appear to have come across before, simply by the way these two communicate. Let me play the sequence.
It seems fate has brought us together again, ma petite Rivet.
Guess fate really loves seeing you get your butt kicked, Pierre.
Ah! Yoo-hoo! Pirate mateys, attack!
Okay, trust no bot. Pirate armor, going back to the state of play footage. Ratchet's armor with a scarf. Rivet with a scarf. Pierre Lefebvre is a robot. I guess you can connect the dots. Lauren Mee, lead writer of the game, regarding the idea of alternate characters, explained this. It's a way for us to take what's great about past games and make it fresh for both longtime fans and for newcomers to the franchise alike. Bringing new characters into a franchise full of memorable and iconic personalities was a really exciting challenge, but I think players will really enjoy getting to spend time with our cast. Fun fact, the animation of her is built around Jennifer Hale's voice acting. Senior animator Lindsay Thompson added that Rivet's an inspired character from female Marvel superheroes. By the way, let me go back to Quark. There was unfortunate news that Jim Ward, the original voice actor of Captain Quark, didn't reprise his role. Both director Mike Daly and community lead James Stevenson brought this to our attention after reports of Quark's voice sounding different. Quark narrating, like I said, it's not present, but people heard his voice. There is a full story behind Jim Ward's exit written by his wife on Facebook. It's really sad to hear. He will be missed. I mean, it's Quark. Jim Ward voicing Quark all those years. I grew up with his voice and it sucks. I'm gonna miss his voice. Now let's talk about Clank minigames. What this minigame revolves around, well, it has us draw power from one dimension to the next. What the Japanese PlayStation blog calls energy. Mike Daly adds the term Clank Lemmings. Pretty much, the structural support between dimensions, they're collapsing and it's catastrophic eventually. Once you're inside these Clank sections, you try and get a line with a bunch of clanks, get the energy flowing from one end to another. Here's a clip from Game Informer featuring Mike Daly diving more into detail and, giving us a better explanation.
Getting the dimensional energy flowing looks to him like getting a line of clanks from one end to the other. So Clank sort of explores these arenas, finding spheres of influence, like these orbs that he can plug into the environment to change the physics properties of these Clank lemmings, or to change the physics properties of the environment itself, or Clank. And it's using those tools that you sort of guide the line around. And that line of clanks can help you get to new places as well if you place them correctly. So there's usually like a little bit of back and forth between Clank and the Clank lemmings to solve the puzzle.
In Rift Apart, there will be 2 mountable beasts apparently. This was confirmed by Insomniac Games. The one we saw is the one with the wings, the dragon-looking creature. As for the other, it is still unknown. Insomniac explains the concept of sync planets. What this means, well, we actually saw it. Rivet and Clank will eventually stumble on large purple-pink crystals. When hit, it gives us a different version of the planet. Seeing as how these crystals don't disappear, we can revert back and forth between the 2 states of the planet. Next, now we're all aware of how Rift Apart is taking advantage of the PS5's tech, right? But what about the story of Rift Apart? How will that make us feel? Well, Mike Daly spoke to Polygon and stated, "The storytelling is where you're going to see the biggest difference. Our character performances and the cinematics are really top-notch. They really suck you into the story and make the characters meaningful and endearing." Marcus Smith, creative director, added that Rivet's perseverance keeps her alive, and that players will learn more about her struggle and the more about the nature of personal relationships. The story has become even more personal. Internal struggles take a more central role to focus on how characters relate to one another. With an alternative dimension, we get to see how these disparate versions of the same characters are different due to their circumstances, but more importantly, how they are true to each other. We then have lead writer Lauren Mee explain how Rivet has this distinct personality and a lot of history in her dimension. I'm not surprised, considering the fact that her Nefarious pretty much won. He became Emperor. There's also the term depth of field, which articles brought up a couple times. An example of such a feature is enemies popping amid the chaos happening on screen. We also make sure to draw a clean silhouette in the background, and use changes in color and depth of field to separate the foreground from the background. With the PlayStation 5, we have more techniques than we had before to combat visual overload, and make sure we draw your attention to the right parts. We also have what they deem visual tricks. For example, how enemy pieces fly off as we shoot them. The addition of camera shake as well, and weapon recoil, which gives your character this backwards motion, the laws of physics. Now, ever since the reveal of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, something looked different, but good different. everything just seems more cinematic, like how you get short cutscenes and then you dive straight into gameplay action with minimal load times. I've always believed Spider-Man is what gave them this new creative approach, and that's basically what happened with this game. There's also Sunset Overdrive in the mix. Insomniac's Mike Fitzgerald, core technology director, explained this: "I would even say more stuff that is essential to the Spider-Man game turned out to be cool for Ratchet, and then has some awesome quality effect on that game that we maybe wouldn't have put in if we'd only been making Ratchet." Example of this, I'd say, is Nefarious City, a bustling city just like New York in Marvel Spider-Man. Mike Daly had this to say: "One of the things that I think makes Ratchet stand out is that we've got this feature-rich engine that was in a lot of ways designed for photorealistic rendering for Spider-Man." He then compares Spider-Man's loading of assets, how downtown would load as you walk through it. Like the stuff that's happening behind you, it's absent, but you're unaware of that. When you move the camera, with just the blink of an eye, the whole area loads. For Rift Apart, they went with a similar approach. Areas load as you walk into them. But whatever's behind you, whatever's not in sight, it's not loaded. It's not like their previous old approach, where you would just load an entire level. But by switching over the Ratchet world to use that same streaming architecture, we can pack more and more density and content and quality in every corner of a Ratchet & Clank world, because we're happy to ditch the west side of Nefarious City when you go to the east side, and that type of thing. What this means, if you move the camera around, yeah, stuff behind you gets unloaded. It's that fast, folks. When talking about the SSD, he added, "That's a nice bonus. We unloaded the things literally behind you from a camera perspective. If you spun the camera around, we could load them before you see that. That lets us devote all of our system memory to the stuff in front of you right now, that you need to experience in that moment." As for the topiary sprinkler, Insomniac Games explained that they generated plant models for each enemy. For a non-PS5 Ratchet & Clank game, they would have to save lots of memory and have that model sit in the background. But the models in Rift Apart, they don't do that. With the PlayStation 5, they only need a second to load with the SSD, meaning until 1 frame before the enemy gets affected by it. That's how fast it is. Mike Smith acknowledges that Rift Apart attracts both kids and longtime fans. He even made an example like wink wink nudge, I get that joke reference type of scenario in this game. With that notion in mind, he explained that they made sure that the level of challenge hits a broad spectrum. Wherever you are, you'll have an appropriate level of challenge. If you're afraid that the game will be too easy, well, Insomniac Games confirmed 4 difficulty options. So as the hardcore player, I think you're going to get a lot of satisfaction out of the hardest difficulty settings, which have a pretty high skill ceiling, explained Mike Daly. A Crack in Time had 4 difficulty options. Fun fact, the 2016 game only had 3. The only game that had 5 was Deadlocked from 2005. Over on their support page, you can actually see these difficulty settings. You can even disable tutorials if you want. Insomniac Games made sure they take into account the past of the series, aka staying true to the nature of the series while also bringing something new to the table. We had to overcome adversity, such as threading the needle between staying true to the franchise's past yet bringing forward something bold and new. There's one important question GameSpot asked Mike Daly. This is regarding Ratchet and Rivet segments. What is the ratio of Ratchet to Rivet segments? It's roughly even. Basically, in the story, the characters each have their own objectives that they're chasing, and we let you pick and choose which one you want to play at any given time. So they're on their parallel tracks, helping solve this big problem. And you can proceed through that at their own pace, but they are parallel tracks, so it's pretty close to even. What we can gather from this information, the game is not designed in a way where it forces you to play as Rivet and then Ratchet, so on and so forth. We get to choose who to play as at any given time. However, there are some parts in the game where Ratchet and Rivet meet and devise their plan. Reaching that point in the game will force you to play as either Ratchet or Rivet, you know, for story purposes, Daly explained. There are touch points where they meet up and formulate the next stage of their plan, or are forced into the next stage of it. But ultimately, they need to act fast and they need to act in parallel to really resolve the problem. Insomniac Games had the original idea of simply going with a Nemesis type of alternate dimension story, where everything was simply a dark mirror. of what we know. You know, they didn't go with the idea of a dark Ratchet just for the sake of alternate dimensions. They instead went with the idea of a character being where they are, you know, their true selves, due to the circumstances of their surroundings, explained Marcus Smith. For example, Rivet obviously at this point, she's Ratchet's alternate. Then we have the Phantom, member of the Resistance who originally we knew as Skid McMarks in our dimension. Next thing to point out which is interesting, GameSpot also states that Nefarious City is Megalopolis' doppelganger, in other words, the alternate version of Megalopolis. But Nefarious City is on Coruscant 5. Megapolis in Going Commando was Planet Indalco. So here's the thing, we are not on Planet Indalco, we're actually on Coruscant 5 if translation is correct over on the PlayStation Japanese blog. So Megapolis, Indalco in Going Commando, and Megalopolis in Coruscant 5, Rift Apart, they're two different cities entirely, and I'd like to believe that our adventure takes place in the Polaris Galaxy. After all, we are dealing with Sargasso with Rivet, which could indicate that we are in Polaris, despite being an alternate dimension. Fun fact, Nefarious City was inspired from Blade Runner. This is something Grant Hollis, art director, added. Nefarious City was inspired by the movie Blade Runner. I didn't have a cyberpunk dystopia in my past works, so I tried to incorporate it. After that, Pixar's Zootopia was helpful in expressing hair. What clumps in Ratchet's fur? Wind affecting fur? I mean, there you go, they took inspiration from Zootopia for all those things. Here's a beautiful concept of Megalopolis, by the way, shared on the same Japanese blog. And here's one for Nefarious City. So yeah, like I just said, these are alternates. Coruscant 5 looking lighthearted, bright, and, you know, colorful, and then we have a darker version, Nefarious City. So what they explained about Nefarious City, aka alternate Coruscant 5, that it's a planet overrun by Emperor Nefarious. They even describe it as a cyberpunk dystopia. GameSpot also makes note of a certain comical segment of the game, how after obtaining a discontinued power-up due to spine failures, Rivet immediately says, "Ow, my spine." What got me more curious is the power-up they talk about. Is it a raritanium sort of upgrade for a weapon or something else? GameSpot also uses the word Clank possibilities for Clank puzzle sections. I guess the word possibilities has to do with all those Clanks we saw in the State of Play. I mean, if you take a close look, the lock on the door needs 7 Clanks, and yet we have more Clanks with us. Next thing to consider, since this game takes place after Into the Nexus, you know, many years have gone by. Lore is being honored, they actually talked about it. They wondered, how much lore do we need in this game? They thought it's their responsibility to continue the story from Into the Nexus. Now story-wise, Ratchet & Clank's adventure in Rift Apart takes place a few years after Into the Nexus. There's also the new players to take into account. The story is self-contained, so there you go. Rift Apart also contains the theme of family, friendship, heroism, empathy, identity, bond. The PS2 games was all about action and gameplay. As the series went on, it got more into the narrative side of things, like Clank's history with the Zoni, Ratchet and the Lombaxes, all that kind of stuff. With Rift Apart, it's all about the internal struggle, as mentioned previously. Like what Laura and me explained over on the Japan PlayStation blog. Like how our characters will learn from each other. How even Ratchet and Clank will learn from one another, if translation on that page is accurate. This whole thing about internal struggle could also lead to other examples. How each planet in Rift Apart will have its own self-contained story. You're not just gonna visit a planet and do some, you know, typical action. Each planet will have its own story. Easy Allies mentioned there's some new funny alternate characters. The way they're being introduced in Rift Apart, I mean, it's gonna be funny apparently.
You know, these old familiar characters in completely new ways has me so excited. There's another one, I don't even want to talk about it, Brad. I'm just gonna leave it off the table, but there's a lot of fun ones from characters past that are coming back in new, funny ways.
As stated previously, what was publicly shown is not everything from behind closed doors. Whoever was invited to this exclusive event, they saw much more, but all the footage that's being shared publicly, it's pretty much B-roll. There's a quote from Adam Nunchester, lead gameplay programmer. Here it is. "This is the first game I've worked on where we didn't have to tell the designers to reduce enemy types." Mike Daly also explained that the PlayStation 5 is simply the least constrained console they worked with. The PS5 gave them so many opportunities, like, they went crazy with details. Basically, the new features of this console allows Insomniac Games to take things even further than ever before. Here's an extra for you guys watching the video. He also confirmed the option of 30 FPS and 60 FPS. He didn't dive into more detail, but there you go. When designing weapons, there are 3 pillars Insomniac Games goes by: spectacle, strategy, and humor/uniqueness. At least one of these categories needs to be a 10. Daily explained, a majority of time spent in gameplay is in combat, so we want every single weapon possible to be a favorite. It's got to be a 10 in some way. As for Rift tethering, it can also be used to your advantage, like dealing with enemies, moving around to your advantage. Next, there's an accessibility feature called Global Time Slowdown. This is something I brought up in my in-depth analysis. If you didn't watch that video, I know it's a lengthy one. I thought of bringing it up in this one. So what this does, it allows you to slow down gameplay with the press of a button on the D-pad. If you find a segment of the game is too complex, too much going on screen, too fast, you can slow down the game. I'll play the same exact segment I played in my in-depth video. It's a clip from Kinda Funny Games.
Different options you could put on, and one of them was global time slowdown, which if you enable it, it's a shortcut on the D-pad that'll slow down the game. You can toggle it on and toggle it off whenever you want to. Will trophies be affected by it? They shouldn't be. It should be achievable with all the benefits on.
Now, Mike Daly added this. You have the ability to assign shortcuts to the D-pad, pretty much at any time. Among those options is the ability to time slow up to 30, 50, or 70%. You pick one of them that best suits you. Put it on a shortcut, and we're very open about this happening during gameplay. Example of scenarios in which one would decide to use this feature, like I said, training, or if there's dramatic special effect going on. You know, environmental puzzles. If anything is too fast for you, you just enable that. Mike Daly reassures that trophies will not be affected. You heard that statement from Kinda Funny Games' clip, so I thought of, reassuring you guys with Daly's statement. He also explains that trophies in this game are quite permissive. They're all actually obtainable in one playthrough. It just depends on how you go about it when playing the game. Word of advice: if you're curious about the trophy list, you can check out the list shared by Insomniac Games themselves on Twitter. They do not share hidden trophies, so be careful of other sources where there might be spoilers. So where was I? Ah yes, Mike Daly talking about trophies. He acknowledges the feeling hardcore Ratchet & Clank gamers might feel towards his statement. With that, he straight up confirms challenge mode. I'm not too surprised, it's Ratchet & Clank. Now, we know that some players really want to go much further than that, and much deeper into the game, and so, as with past Ratchet games, we've got a challenge mode that lets you start from the beginning of the story again, but with your complete leveled up hero and arsenal and a handful of gadgets. And so, if you really want to play the game, challenge mode is for you more so than the Platinum Trophy. So, about the music, Insomniac Games really wanted something like Thor Ragnarok. They simply reached out to Mark Mothersbaugh. Insomniac feels that some concepts of Thor Ragnarok that didn't make it into the movie might be present in some form in Rift Apart. Now, according to PlayStation blog Japan, Mothersbaugh explains that Rift Apart's music was recorded in an orchestra of 70 to 100 people. He aimed for a style that wouldn't bore the player, something persuasive. If say we revisit the same planet, the music you hear will be different. A different view of the stage. The mood of the music changes as well depending on the flow of gameplay apparently. Mothersbaugh pretty much summarized that what he did in Rift Apart, it's different than ordinary compositions. So now, let's talk a bit more about the preview gameplay and cutscene quick. Ratchet & Clank are being celebrated in this parade. I think we're all aware of that at this point. Marcus Smith explained that they're celebrating their past victories. For a few years, they've been living their lives peacefully. They haven't been out there saving the universe. They feel a bit kinda overwhelmed, a bit unworthy during this scene. From the dialogue we have here, our duo's aware that they're under assault, who we later find out to be the goons hired by Nefarious. This scene. Ratchet's expression. Look at him, it's just so adorable. Let me play it.
I had a speech prepared, but considering that our event seems to be under assault, I will cut to the chase. Ratchet, I do not know where I would be without you. You are my closest friend, my teammate, and you have given up a lot to... I have repaired the Dimensionator, so you can travel through dimensions and find your family. Pal, So yeah, Clank actually is the one who fixed the Dimensionator confirmed.
For some time now, we wondered who the heck fixed the Dimensionator, and who the heck even redesigned it. It's Clank. I'm surprised he turned it into a gun, pretty much. Instead of putting it on your head, you just shoot a beam and it opens a rift. Ratchet in this scene seems to not want to go there. As stated previously, Clank eventually wonders why Ratchet seemed so hesitant. As a reminder, this was being discussed between Clank and Rivet in a scene which isn't shown. The question is, why would Clank still want Ratchet to meet the Lombaxes after what we had in Into the Nexus? We believed that Ratchet was happy staying in this dimension. That's what he specifically told Clank, that there's more here than there. I guess Clank snatching the Dimensionator at the end of that game made us think he still wanted to help Ratchet, I guess? With that, I am really curious to see where this story will take us. That logo on the mic looks really familiar. It's the same logo we had in Into the Nexus when Talon was on the news, for example. This scene, it's so heartwarming. Clank saying, "You are my closest friend, my teammate to Ratchet."
Ratchet, I do not know where I would be without you. You are my closest friend.
And Ratchet seeming hesitant to join the Lombaxes, I mean, that's a good example of the internal struggles which Insomniac Games is introducing us to with the story in Rift Apart. I'm already liking the style of humor they're going with here, like how the goons were supposed to annihilate these two 8 minutes ago. It gave me quite a chuckle. It doesn't seem forced. It's something Nefarious would say. Clank even goes like, "Oh, what do you want, Nefarious? Like, what do you want this time?" There's some casual factor to how they interact, and that's what I'm loving so far. Like, these characters have known each other for years, they're used to it, and they're just like, "Ugh, Nefarious again, what do you want?" It gives off that feeling. Another thing that made me laugh, I think it's something we can relate to as grown-ups, the thing about instructions manual. Nefarious gets so frustrated, I mean, the expression in his face, I mean, it's pretty funny.
Can't anyone print instruction manuals anymore?
We have Quark at the bottom. I don't know if he's alarmed or just celebrating like nothing's going on. Same goes for Skid McMarks. They both seem to just stand there. Well, not for Quark, but you know, Skid. So, Nefarious opens a rift. Chaos ensues because it's Dr. Nefarious. This whole segment also acts as a tutorial, with all the button prompts appearing on screen. Another funny, tired remark by Nefarious here, let me play it. Like I said previously, they're used to each other and they're just like tired at the same time. The way the music transitions here, from serious chaos to more heroic, as we land to deal with the goons, it really gives this feeling of, I mean, I don't know how to put it, but what I mean is, Ratchet is a more mature character in this game. He's developed. A lot of us grew up with these characters. Like, this is still Ratchet you know and love. One still with insecurities, apparently, but no longer chasing the ghost of his past by impulse, explained Marcus Smith. Just seeing our duo back in action with that more light-hearted, heroic, upbeat track transition, it just gives you this happy feeling, like, wow, like Ratchet has grown up, I was there the whole time, that sort of thing.
Turn yourself in, Wombat!
How the action and cutscenes transitions to gameplay is really seamless. Very cinematic, it's like playing a movie almost. This is what Insomniac Games is aiming for pretty much, and I love it. Not to mention the sounds above your head and from a distance. You're just fully immersed in the game, like it's really awesome. This scene right here appears to have been changed going back to the August 2020 extended gameplay. When we fall in this place, Ratchet feels they'll find Nefarious near the train. Pretty much the scene we saw in the extended demo from August. That's what's gonna play out afterwards.
I also have a talent for improvisation.
Well, I can't wait to see you in action.
Then we dive into a scene with Rivet and Clank. Looking at these two, Rivet and Clank will have an interesting story twist, says Game Informer. PlayStation Japan blog Marcus Smith added this. Characters also have many surprise elements that haven't been announced yet. I'm not going to announce it until it's released, but I'm looking forward to everyone playing and meeting the characters. Then we have Lindsay Thompson, senior animator, state the following. In fact, there were many times when I thought I feel like I'm making a movie, rather than in a bad way. My opinion is quite personal, but I've taken great care to create a story that really touches the player's heart. So again, this adds on to the whole internal struggle aspect. After Rivet states that she can't wait to see Clank in action, we land with our ship. Pause it right here. It appears we can hop back into our ship. This is yet another question that gets answered. Yes, we can travel with our ship in Rift Apart. Taking a quick look at a segment from Planets and Explorations trailer shared on May 20th, we have Ratchet in a ship. It looks to be that ship he took from Nefarious City. We even have Emperor Nefarious's face right in the middle in purple. Unfortunately, looking at this, we won't have that free travel with our ship like in the Kraken time. Not saying that I was expecting it, but Rift Apart and the PlayStation 5 as a whole could have utilized that easily. We also have a glimpse of a ship traveling to a planet. Perhaps a cutscene. Again, this is a scene from the Planets and Traversal trailer. I don't think it's a load screen, like in the original, simply because of the SSD. We have Planet Savali, it'd be this planet right here. Skartsu Debris Zerkis Field, it's not shown, but I guess it's this one, Zircon head in the middle. Because, I mean, if you think about it, Zerky sounds similar to Zircon, so that's my guess. Then we got Sargasso and Corson 5, and now, another important question gets answered. Mike Daly, in Ratchet fashion, he explains, you hop onto your ship, you choose which planet to tackle next. There's a lot of optional stuff to do, you know, subplots, he calls it. You go back to planets, do those extra quests, you play as the Lombax who was on that respective planet. Two Lombaxes, Ratchet and Rivet, travel freely around the galaxy at most points in the game. So with that, you choose your planet and Lombax you're playing as. Daly calls this a tag team with planet. This is pretty much an extension of what I said before about the Ratchet and Rivet segments, but there will be moments where the game will force us to play as either Rivet or Ratchet for story purposes. Next thing I'd like to mention, Rift Apart will have lots of moments where we hear banter, especially with Rivet and Pierre.
But you should have seen the fixer! Such power! For the last people!
Did you talk him to death or what? Good thing you'll never have to find out!
During this part of the gameplay when things are more quiet, it didn't stop Insomniac Games from adding even more depth to our characters. There's a bunch of examples I've seen. Clank mentioning that the bridge is out.
The bridge seems to be out of commission.
Clank and Rivet on the grind rails.
He's bringing the whole place down!
Junk ahead!
This section with the Vollards.
Pardon me. Does anyone here know where we can find the fixer?
Guess they're being cautious.
Now here's an interesting quote. And so we build in sort of a low intensity parts of the level where we can have banter and conversations that enhance the story and give depth to our characters. And we use cinematics sort of as a pace setter and a reward for getting through the tough gameplay segments. I noticed the hover boots here don't have that charging rollerblading effect going on in the beginning. Actually, you have the option to toggle on off this feature in the accessibility settings. What this feature is useful for, you know, charging up your charge boots slowly, it gives you more flexibility. Like, should I reach top speed, or should I make a slight turn by simply kicking my feet around on the ground? Hover boots also makes for a pretty cool traversal. Look at Rivet here, for example. She twirls into the air. She quickly then manages to use her Rift tether from a distance. That's pretty cool, I like it. It's fast-paced. You can even swing your hammer while hover booting to break crates. From the State of Play gameplay, we can smash crates without swinging our melee weapon as well. We can also cause damage to enemies while hover booting. Notice how the pirate glows red as we hit it. From what we can gather from this gameplay, our characters will tell us, suggest to use other approach when dealing with enemies. Like Rivet in this section, she uses the Enforcer, but you know, pirates have a bunch of shields up, so she hints at using another weapon.
Ah, shields! Looks like we're gonna have to get creative.
Here's an idea. You can use the Topiary Sprinkler to sneak around them and then use a weapon such as the Shatter Bomb to deal with them. Speaking of the Topiary Sprinkler, they wanted to make a more comical version of just, you know, a typical freeze gun, which was their original idea, by the way. Neat detail here, when they're topiaried, the eyes on their shield turn yellow to blue. As for the Negatron Collider, typically weapons with a charge mechanic in Ratchet & Clank has you pressing and holding a button and then releasing to shoot. In Rift Apart, the Negatron Collider, which is a charged weapon, actually has you feel resistance into the trigger of your controller and fires as you go through that resistance. At least that's what I understood from all the preview commentaries I watched. So what this means, you can easily cancel out your beam if need be. This offers a more tactical approach to this weapon. There's even footage floating around, primarily showcasing this weapon, Ratchet standing still. This one I found from GameSpot. As for the Ricochet, it's actually a timing-based weapon. Sort of a pinball or ping pong, call it, sort of weapon. When you first launch that ball, if you time it right, you know, the ball opening halfway, you can use the trigger on your controller to then ping pong the ball on the enemy. You can even do this by taking cover, which is interesting. Once that's done, you know, the ping pong effect, you get a nice finisher. Pretty much, this is a weapon unlike anything we've ever seen in the series. Looking at this boss, he was actually launching projectiles at us from a distance before, so watch out. When dealing enough damage to this boss, it loses its belly shield or grill, call it. Fun fact, Not So Wee Roger is a different variant of a boss that appears shortly prior. The first one would be called So Wee Roger. It's not shown in gameplay, simply explained. It was mentioned by Games Radar. I guess we're dealing with twins? And yeah, the first variant of this boss happened like not even 5 minutes prior. As for the Void Repulsor, it's a shield weapon with a short range of attack when you're close enough. Looking at the Enforcer, something new I learned. Upgrading it eventually will give you the option to shoot 4 times, or 4 barrels in other words. They also talked about the Pixelizer, which isn't shown. As a reminder, if you pre-order Rift Apart, you get early unlocks of the Carbonix armor and the Pixelizer. So yeah, about the Pixelizer, apparently all those small pixels on enemies have ray tracing in them. You can pay close attention to this sort of detail in photo mode. We also have a better look at Mr. Fungi. It clearly shows here that he throws red orbs at surrounding enemies. Here's another old weapon which got confirmed, Glove of Doom, which originates from the 2002 game. The Drill Hound in action for the first time. At some point we thought this would be like the cancelled Revolverator from the original 2002 game, but no, it's called the Drill Hound. What it does is, it launches a drill and lands on the enemy pretty much. You can use this within a short range and a long range. From what I can tell, 2 shots of this weapon kills the pirate. Doesn't matter if they have a shield or not, 2 shots regardless. The Drill Hound's hitbox leaves a fiery trail on that pirate's shield. It's a cool little detail, thought I'd point it out. So whenever you see these visual clues on those shields, that pretty much gives you the indication that that enemy took damage prior. Insomniac Games also confirmed Auto Strafe. It's been a thing since Into the Nexus. Auto Strafe I'm talking about, not strafing, the auto feature. I'm not sure if you're a fan of auto strafing, but it is currently unknown if we can decide to switch to manual. Another little detail, ammo glows purple with Rivet compared to Ratchet's yellow. Ammo lying around transitions from white to either purple or yellow, which indicates that you need ammo. Looking at this part, we have our first crank with Rivet's hammer. Light glows indicating how far you rotated the crank. Our mission here is to find the fixer, so to do so we have to retrieve the hurl shot, which makes us spin like crazy into the air and then get launched. And I think we have reached the ending of this video. Yeah, I personally feel that was a lot of information to go over. And yeah, if you sat through the whole thing, as always, you are awesome. Thank you so much. If by any chance I missed anything important, don't be shy. Mention it in the comments section below. And yeah, as always, I've been Vivi. I will try my best to keep you updated when it comes to Rift Apart content, and yeah, until next time, thank you.